The Pacific was a long way from mobile Alabama. When Eugene Sledge raised his right hand in 1943, he was a soft-spoken Southern boy who said yes, sir, and no, ma'am, who loved birds and quiet creeks and the feel of a pencil on good paper. He had been raised to wipe his shoes before entering someone's home, to write thank-you notes, and to listen when older people talked. Courtesy wasn't window dressing for him. It was a way of carrying himself in the world. But 1943 was a year that didn't leave much room for softness. 2 oceans were on fire. In Europe, German armour chewed up towns and hedgerows, and the sky looked cross-hatched by the contrails of bombers. Across the Pacific, little islands with musical names Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Bougainville were turning into places that lived in men's dreams long after the fighting stopped. The United States, still young in some ways, grew up fast. Trains ran hot. Factories never slept. Fields gave what they could give. Boys learned how to be men on assembly lines, in hangars, in barracks, and sooner or later, on ships. Eugene Sledgehammer, his friends would later say with affection, volunteered for the Marines. He believed in duty the way some folks believe in sunrise. He knew fear, of course. Everyone did. But he had a stubborn streak of resolve and a simple plan for keeping fear in its place. Learn your job so well you can do it in the dark, then do it for the man to your left and the man to your right. That kind of thinking turns a worried heart into a steady pair of hands. Boot camp would sand down what was extra and harden what remained. War would do the rest. People often talk about wars in clean timelines, arrows marching across maps, dates, and outcomes. Sledge did not live a timeline. He lived a string of moments tied together by effort. The rhythm of boots on a road at dawn, the metallic scent of gun oil, the sting of a sergeant's voice that somehow made you stand straighter even when your legs were jelly. The slow, careful way you learn to keep your mouth shut when there's nothing useful to say. None of that shows up in a textbook, but it's the foundation of a fighting life. Before Peleliu and Okinawa, there were small things. The way you lace your boots so mud can't eat them off your feet. The way you pack your gear so the heaviest items sit high and close to the spine. The way you fold a letter home so it doesn't get ruined by damp. You don't think of these as noble arts, but later on, in the worst places, habits like that are the rails your mind runs on. Sledge wasn't a chest thumper. He wasn't built for bragging. He was the kind of young man who turned down the volume on his own voice so others could speak. In a year's time, he would learn to keep that same quiet presence while the air tore with noise rifles cracking, machine guns stitching, explosions lifting the ground. He would discover that gentleness can live inside a man even while he does hard, ugly work. It only needs a little protection, the way a candle needs your cupped hand when the wind kicks up. The country learned fast too. Training camps filled and emptied like tides. Liberty ships rattled across the world's biggest ocean. Men left home light and came back heavy if they came back. What changed Sledge wasn't just the uniform. It was the feeling of belonging to a small circle of men who counted on one another. In the Marines, the center of the universe shrinks down to your squad, your mortar team, the fellows whose footsteps you recognize by sound. You learn a vow no one writes down. I'll do my part so you can do yours. Sledge would one day become a teacher and a biologist, the sort of man who points out how a bird's wing makes sense when you really look at it. He would one day write a book that sits on the good shelf in people's homes. But at the beginning he was just a private in a sea of privates, learning to count under pressure, to breathe when his thoughts tried to run away without him, to hold something heavy and let go at exactly the right instant. He was assigned to a 60mm mortar team. A mortar round feels solid in the hand, a tidy piece of fate you carry from here to there. You learn angles and wind, and the arc you can only picture in your head. You learn the sound, the muffled thunk when a round drops and the tube answers back with its own heavy syllable. When his ship pointed west, the boys crowded the rail at night and stared into a horizon that never came closer. The Pacific can be a glass tabletop or a wrinkled iron sheet, but at night It's a dark page, with a ribbon of cold air stretched across it. Conversations started and thinned and finally fell quiet, replaced by the thud of the hull and the soft grit of canvas against canvas. Home became a place you saw when you closed your eyes. The porch light, the grocery at the corner, the dog that trotted after your bicycle. Little things. But little things have a way of holding a man together. It helps to picture Eugene's home before we follow him out to sea. Mobile, Alabama. Sunday clothes and clean shoes. Supper where folks ask how your day went and wait to hear the answer. There he learned restraint and kindness, two skills the world sometimes calls softness until it needs them. On a battlefield, restraint keeps you from doing the thing you can't take back. Kindness keeps you human. Later, when he comes home and chooses science, you'll see the same habits, steady observation, patience, a willingness to let facts speak in a different uniform. He knew, even before stepping onto the first beach, that war would mark him. No one could say how deep the mark would go, or who would carry it longest, or what shape it would take in the years after. He didn't pretend he could control that. He decided to control what he could, his job, his pack, his weapon, his voice when another man needed it. For a young Marine, that is wealth you can spend every day. If you could bottle the air of that opening chapter, it would smell like diesel and salt, and it would carry a hush at the edges, the hush that comes before a storm, when people tie down what they can and tell each other small, practical truths. You would hear a pencil scratch across paper as a letter begins. Dear folks, I'm doing fine. You would know, as he knew, that I'm doing fine is sometimes less a report and more a gift, sent across water to help a mother sleep. Tomorrow would bring work. Real work. A mortar is not poetry, but the team that runs it has a rhythm a drummer would recognize. Baseplate firm, tube steady, sight adjusted. Round in the hand, the fuse a brief reminder of time's stubbornness. Drop, thunk, count, correct, do it again. And between the beats, listen for your name, listen for the short jokes that mean somebody still has hope to spare. Listen for the word move when it's time to disappear and set up again somewhere safer, if safer is a word that still means anything. Tonight, on the dark water, Eugene stood shoulder to shoulder with men whose futures were packed away in the same green duffel bags as his. They breathed the same wet air. They looked up at a silver coin of a moon and wondered if anyone back home was looking at it, too. He told himself something simple and true, the kind of sentence plain enough to hold in one hand. Do your part. He didn't know it yet, but that sentence would carry him through heat that burned the soul and rain that soaked it. Tomorrow would come, and with it, the rain. Boot camp at New River wasn't built for poetry either. It was built for habits. The first lesson was not about courage. It was about corners, how to square them when you make a rack so tight a quarter will. Jump. The second lesson was about the rifle, how to clean it, even when you're too tired to see straight, how to field strip it by touch, how to carry it so it becomes another joint in your body instead of dead weight on your shoulder. The third lesson was about silence, when to keep it and when to fill it with the exact words needed, no more and no less. Sledge didn't stick out in the loud way. He stuck in. The quiet young man from Alabama proved good at listening, which is its own kind of strength. He watched how the best recruits moved. Economy of motion, no wasted steps. He watched how the good corporals and sergeants led. Voice low, eyes level, orders clean enough to write on a matchbook. He learned to tuck away a joke for the right moment, to pass a cigarette without making a ceremony of it, to share a canteen the way you'd share a secret carefully, not to show off. Letters were the lifeline. You wrote them hunched over a footlocker or a helmet turned upside down for a desk, crouched under a bare bulb that made everyone look older. What you put on paper wasn't the whole story. No one needed to hear how your shoulders ached or how the cold crept through a barracks wall at 3 a.m. You wrote about the human-sized parts of your day, the details that didn't worry mothers. You thanked an aunt for cookies, even if the tin had been demolished by the time it reached your hands. You told a younger cousin to keep his grades up. You asked after a neighbour you'd never much liked but suddenly missed in a sideways way. At night, when the lights went out, the barracks breathed like a single animal. Some men murmured in their sleep. Some men clenched their teeth. A few cried quiet tears they would deny in the morning. No shame in that, though nobody said so. Being young and far from home will squeeze a heart. The trick is to let it spring back. Drill instructors come in flavours, but the good ones share two secrets. First, they know you're scared, and they don't take it personally. Second, they love competence, not flash, just competence. The kind of competence that lets you trust your hands when your head is busy. Sledge responded to that. He didn't need to be the fastest or the strongest. He needed to be the sort of Marine who always showed up, squared away, not flustered by rain, by heat, by the 1,000 tiny insults a day can throw at you. His path led to the mortar section. A 60mm mortar team is a small machine made of people. One man carries the tube, one hauls the base plate, another keeps the rounds and their fuses. Someone checks the sight, someone calls corrections. It takes rhythm to do it well. The rhythm comes from practice. The practice builds a trust so thick you stop noticing it. You just act. They ran the same drills until sweat carved white tracks through the dust on their faces. Drop to a knee, set the plate, slide the tube, lock it in, level, aim, feed, fire. Eyes checking hands, hands trusting eyes. A good team is full of small courtesies. Someone shifts the weight of a load onto his own shoulder when he sees the man beside him start to flag. Somebody else swaps positions because his partner's knee is acting up. These are not favours, they're investments. You help today because tomorrow your turn will come. Friendship in the Marines is different from friendship in regular life. In regular life, friends are people you choose because of shared interests, a similar sense of humour, history you like to revisit together. In the Marines, friendship is what happens when your safety depends on the same decisions, and you make those decisions over and over under pressure. You begin to learn each other's tells, who cracks jokes when he's scared, who gets quiet, who hums tunelessly as if the sound punches holes in anxiety. You don't need to love all of it. You just need to know it. Familiarity becomes a form of comfort. Sledge kept a pocket for small mercies. He held onto memories of home not to escape the present but to add another plank to the bridge he was walking on. The taste of sweet tea on a hot day, the smell of cut grass, his mother's handwriting, a gentle slope that looked the same in every season. When letters arrived, men slowed down, opening them, almost ceremonious. You learned to skim for the important news and bookmark the rest for later, when the world was quieter. Bad news travelled along the bunk rows with care. Good news got read aloud twice. Training is where you discover how a body handles stress. You learn that a mile is longer when you carry someone else's pack. You learn that blisters have personalities, that a hot spot can be bargained with for an hour if you give it a little padding and a promise. You learn that you can run on empty for longer than you guessed, as long as someone time checks you and you can see his face when he says, "Almost there." The older you get, the more you realise this is a life lesson dressed up in camo. Most of us can go a little farther with a little help. There were light moments. Somebody did a perfect impression of a major's stiff walk, and the barracks erupted. Someone else smuggled in a harmonica and turned a 5-minute break into a back porch concert. A photograph made the rounds a baby with a bowl on his head like a helmet, and even the toughest sergeant laughed. None of these things made you stronger in an obvious way, yet they shored up the beams of a day so the roof didn't sag. As the weeks ran together, the boys' faces changed. Not older, exactly, but more set, chins that had been soft with youth squared up at the edges. The eyes stayed young, the gaze got longer. They stopped asking how long until chow, and started asking how many rounds to carry. They learned to check boots, fill canteens, tie down gear without being told. This is what people mean when they say training turns boys into Marines. It isn't a magic trick, its repetition braided with purpose. Near the end of the cycle, the talk around New River shifted from if to when we ship out, when we see the Pacific, when we meet men who've already been through the furnace. There is a hush in that kind of talk, the hush you hear in a church after the hymn ends and before the preacher begins. You start looking at your friends as if trying to memorize them, a way of walking, a laugh that comes from the chest, a habit of rubbing the back of the neck when thinking. No one says why they're noticing, but everyone knows. On the last weekend before departure, Sledge wrote a longer letter home. He wrote about the weather and the chow, and a corporal who had taken the time to show him a better way to shoulder the tube. He thanked his folks for a package that somehow smelled like their kitchen even after the miles between. He didn't write about fear, not directly. He wrote about purpose. He wrote about doing a job well because other men depended on it, and he signed it with love and the promise to write again soon. There are many kinds of bravery. The kind we put on posters wears sharp angles and bold colours. The kind that fills a barracks on the last night before shipping out is quieter. It is men laying out their gear so they can reach everything in the dark. It is a fellow stopping at your bunk just to say, "Wake me if you can't sleep." It is someone slipping half a deck of cards into your pocket because he knows the hours on a ship can be long. It is the decision not once, but day after day to show up and give your best. New River didn't make heroes. It made professionals. That word is a good one. A professional is someone who shows up ready, does the work, and cleans up afterward. When the Pacific called, Sledge and his friends answered as professionals. Not because they were hard men eager for a fight, but because they understood that readiness is a form of respect for the job, for the country, and most of all for the men beside you. On a cool night with the wind coming off the pines, the barracks slept. The next morning would bring inspections and orders. Soon enough would come the long water and the islands. But for the moment there was only a row of young men breathing evenly, their boots lined up like small promises on the floor. A few whispered prayers rose and were folded into the dark. If you had been there to listen closely, you might have heard a different kind of prayer too, the one that sounds like resolve. Let me do my part. The ocean has its own clock. Days glide by with the same view in every direction, water and sky and water, so that time feels like a circle instead of a line. On deck, men breathed diesel and salt. Below, the air smelled of canvas, damp wool, and the sharp tang of metal. Bunks stacked 3 high-turned bodies into book spines. You slid in, you slid out, you learned to turn without elbowing the man above you, and you got used to the way a ship makes its own weather, always a breeze somewhere, always a creek you can't locate. Out there, the talk thinned to essentials. Men swapped hometown stories the way boys trade baseball cards, each one worth a smile and a nod. Somebody described a snow that fell so soft you could hear it land. Somebody else told about a summer evening thick with lightning bugs, and half the men could see it in their minds. A harmonica surfaced again, and a tune that might have been Home on the Range drifted across the dark. You didn't have to sing along to feel it. Pavuvu greeted them like a damp handshake. It was green and tired and full of insects. It became a way station for the 1st Marine Division, a place to stage and drill and wait. Waiting is a skill too. You learn how to stay useful without burning up your energy. You learn the difference between a rumour and a plan. You learn that the quietest man in the tent is often the best source of truth. Eugene and his mortar crew drilled until the motions ran smooth. The tube and base plate grew familiar as tools in a garden shed. The weight found its place in their bodies, the way a farmer's shoulders learn a hay bale. They checked fuses with the same care a mother checks a fever, no drama, just steady attention. Their sergeant had a voice like worn leather and a habit of asking the simplest question at the right time. Good to go? It turns out that hearing yourself answer good can push fatigue back one more step. The strategic talk grew louder. The name Peleliu entered conversations like a pebble in a shoe, small but impossible to ignore. From a map's height, Peleliu was an airfield on a small island in the Palau group, a stepping stone meant to guard the flank of the drive toward the Philippines. Take the airfield, secure the island, move on. The plan sounded clean. Plans often do, right up until they meet the ground. Rumors said it would be quick. Some officers said 3 or 4 days. The veterans who'd seen other islands didn't bet on calendars. They knew the Japanese had changed their tactics. Instead of throwing themselves at the surf, they dug in, tunneled, and waited for the Marines to climb into ridges full of hidden teeth. You could feel the veterans' caution, the way a man feels the weather in an old scar. On Pavuvu, evenings gave a gift that war rarely offers, a view with no explosions in it. Men sat and watched the sky go pink and then purple, and then the soft black that makes stars possible. Someone wrote a letter and tried to describe the color of that sky, but words kept slipping away. You can't mail a smell or a temperature or the exact sound of waves combing a reef. You do your best and trust that the person reading will supply the rest from their own life. Supplies came and went in stacks that looked like they might topple. Boxes of ammunition, crates of rations, tarps, tools, spare parts. The arithmetic of war is simple in one respect. You burn through everything. You eat, drink, shoot, patch, and then you need more. The smaller arithmetic inside a mortar team is even simpler. Carry what you can, share the load, pass rounds hand to hand as if you're building a wall that keeps someone alive. That's not poetry. That's the truth. There were brief, odd pleasures. A magazine left behind by another unit. A can of peaches that somehow tasted exactly like August. A bar of soap that smelled faintly of home. These things mattered not because they were rare, but because they reminded men that comfort existed somewhere and might exist again. The body believes what you feed it. A small sweetness tells your nerves to stand down for a minute. Then came the order, gear packed, final checks. No man wanted to forget something and borrow it later from a friend who might need it more. Letters written quick and sealed. A few, the kind that speak too plainly, were torn in half and tossed. Better to keep some thoughts for when a man could sit at a real table and find the right words. When the ships pointed toward Peleliu, a hush laid itself across the decks. The morning of the landing rose bright and hot, the kind of heat that makes colours go hard-edged. The closer they drew, the louder the world got. Naval guns spoke first, long and low, shouldering the island with blasts that shoved the air around. Smoke climbed and drifted. The beaches looked pale, almost pretty. From a distance, pretty is a liar in war. Men climbed down cargo nets into landing craft with the grace of people who had practiced 100 times and the stiffness of people who had slept poorly. Packs bit into shoulders. Web gear tugged. Somebody cracked a joke about the Navy's coffee. Somebody else took a last quick look at a photograph, then slid it back into the pocket it always lived in. The ramp clanged shut. Engines coughed. The craft turned toward shore, each man inside a small room made of noise and breath and thoughts he would not later remember clearly. The plan said the 1st Marine Division would hit the beach, cross the airfield, and keep pushing. Sledge's mortar section would do what mortar sections do. Get their kit ashore, find a place with cover and a good angle, and start walking rounds in where they were needed. He looked at the faces around him, the sergeant with the calm eyes, the kid from Ohio who hated onions, the fellow whose laugh came out like a bark and he felt the most useful feeling a man can feel in a bad spot. I am with good people. Ahead lay coral and heat, dust and glare, names they didn't yet know for ridges that would feel like the inside of a bad dream. But for a few minutes more, there was only the slap of waves and the knowledge that the boat would soon grind into sand. Sledge reached down and touched the tube, the way a man pats a tool before using it. Not superstition, respect. Good to go? The sergeant asked over the engine's drone. Good, the crew answered, one voice made of many. The ramp dropped. The first breath Sledge took on Peleliu tasted like burnt salt and dust. Sunlight lay on the beach like a sheet of white metal. The sand wasn't sand the way it is on postcards. It was coral ground, fine, bright, reflective, and sharp as a broken plate under your knees. Airfield just inland shimmered as if it were a mirage. Between the beach and that shimmer stood the work of the day. Noise has shapes, rifle fire snaps, machine guns hammer in flat, angry lines. Mortars cough and then speak again a few seconds later, far off. Artillery says everything at once, a rip, a boom, a falling house. On Peleliu, all those shapes overlapped until the brain stopped trying to sort them. You learned to hear one thing only, your name, shouted by a voice you trusted. The mortar crew moved like a small, practiced dance. Tube, baseplate, sight, ammunition. Men dropped low, hands quick. The first round went into the tube. The thunk rolled up through Sledge's bones. He tracked the invisible arc in his mind, saw it land against a ridge where muzzle flashes had winked. Correction called, elevation tweaked. Another round. And another. In the space between, he noticed breath going in and out, the scrape of a boot, the way hot dust collects at the corners of a mouth. Peleliu was supposed to be quick. It was not quick. The Japanese had dug themselves into a honeycomb of caves and cut positions across the Umabrogel ridges, a tangle of broken limestone that made maps lie. From the air, the place looked simple. A flat strip of airfield, a handful of hills. On the ground, every fold and crease hid a gun. You could lose a day inside 100 yards. Heat did the work of another enemy. Canteens warmed to body temperature by mid-morning. Throats went raw. Sweat dried too fast to cool the skin, leaving salt in your eyebrows and on your lips. Men rationed water the way you ration minutes in a hospital waiting room, sparing, hopeful, not always wise. The mortar team traded sips like it was part of the drill. They moved up, dug shallow, fired, moved again. The ground fought back. A hole in coral is a scrape more than a shelter. Shrapnel spanged and bounced, shards coming off rock at bad angles. You learned to keep your helmet low and your hopes modest. Just don't let a piece find your throat or your eyes. A corpsman slid in and out like a quiet angel, hands doing small miracles in the open. His voice stayed calm enough to lower a pulse. Somewhere nearby, a machine gun chattered until it didn't. Someone cheered a short, guilty sound, and then the work rolled on. The Japanese were patient. They had cut firing slits so small a man could put his eye to one and see an entire approach. They had grenades to roll downhill and mortars to answer back. They had the advantage of shade and the commitment of men who believed dying here would serve their country with honor. That kind of belief is not to be underestimated. Sledge kept his world small sight, tube, round, correction because the bigger world was unmanageable. A mortar crew has its own manners. You pass around the same way every time. You speak the same words in the same order. Ritual doesn't win a battle, but it keeps a man balanced on the beam while he crosses a room full of knives. In the middle of noise, there were tiny moments of humanity. A canteen appeared over a shoulder without a word. A hand pressed the back of a neck for 1 second, steadying. A joke was offered, not funny, exactly, but kind, and the man it was meant for smiled with his eyes. These gestures were not a cure. They were stitches that kept the day from coming apart. Captain Andrew Akak, Haldane, commanding K Company, moved with the economy of someone who knew the cost of each step. He had the gift of presence. You felt better when he was near, not because he promised safety no officer can, but because he radiated competence and care. Men follow a voice like that in the worst places. They remember it after, too, in quiet rooms. The ridges had a name, Umabrogel, but the men called them other things under their breath. The terrain was broken coral, pale and jagged, split into folds and seams where a man could disappear 10 feet from you and be gone. Caves honeycombed the hillsides. A firing slit could look like a shadow until it spat flame. You moved by inches. You measured progress not by yards, but by what you could see without getting shot. Mortar work on that ground felt like threading a needle with gloves on. The crew slid into a scrape, levelled the plate as best they could on rock that didn't want to be level, and worked the sight against a landscape that kept lying. Rounds walked up slopes in patient steps. Corrections came quick, quiet, precise. It's strange what you notice when the world is burning. Eugene remembered the grain of the tube's paint on his palm, the way sunlight bounced off a shard of coral like a shard of mirror, the small relief of a cloud crossing the sun for 30 honest seconds. Captain Andrew A. Haldane Akak was the kind of officer who didn't draw attention to himself. He drew attention to the job. Men trusted him because he knew the ground, because he had the listening habit, and because his orders showed he valued their lives as much as he valued the objective. Leadership like that buys you a kind of quiet in the line. It doesn't make you fearless. It just gives fear something decent to stand next to. The fight on Peleliu kept bending into the ridges. The airfield, once taken, turned out to be the easy part. The Brogol didn't just resist, it absorbed effort. You could take a crest by noon and find it alive with fire again by 3. The Japanese defense was built to slow, bleed, and exhaust. And it worked. The Marines learned, as soldiers always do, that the map is a rumor and the ground is the truth. Sledge's mortar section fell into a rhythm of hard facts. Move up, set, fire, shift, repeat. Between the facts were threads of mercy. A corpsman pressed a bandage and kept his voice low, the way a father hums to a crying child. A Marine took a canteen from his own belt and tipped it to another man's lips without making eye contact, because neither of them needed to make a ceremony out of a simple kindness. Someone shared a tin of fruit, a peach slice sliding like summer onto a tongue that had forgotten sweetness. None of that changed the battle. All of it changed the day. There were moments you could tell, even as they happened, would stay forever. One came when a buddy ducked, an inch too slow, and the world snapped tight around the space he left. Another came when a line of men rose and moved as if they shared a spine, and for 5 seconds the universe made sense. You do the next necessary thing, and so do they, and in that agreement lives a kind of grace. The memory of those seconds becomes a lantern you carry down the years. Then came the day the company lost its compass. On the 12th of October, 1944, Captain Haldane, scouting and observing, was killed by a sniper. The news passed mouth to mouth and settled like cold ash. Even men who thought themselves beyond tears felt their throats catch. You could hear the change in the way orders were given and answered for the rest of that day, an extra beat, a carefulness shot through with anger. Grief doesn't pause a battle. It just climbs into your pack, and you carry it. Sledge would remember Haldane with the kind of loyalty that can't be faked. Later, when writing, he would choose words that fit the man measured, respectful, free of decoration. In the moment, there was only work. The mortar had to speak. The ridge had to be pushed. The men had to eat when someone told them to, and drink before thirst made them foolish. Duty is not a flag you wave. It's a list you keep. The ridges taught a bitter practicality. The enemy was not an idea. He was a skilled, determined soldier using terrain better than any manual could teach. You could hate what he stood for and still respect the way he fought. That respect kept you alive. Underestimating an opponent is a luxury you can afford only once. In the evenings, if you can call any part of Peleliu an evening, the heat eased by the smallest degree. The sky went from hard white to a flat metal grey. Smoke hung low like a roof. Someone in the next scrape over told a story about a Sunday picnic, and a few men smiled into the dirt. Someone else said a quick prayer, not about victory, but about endurance. You learn to ask for the right thing. The phrase, "war strips us bare," is something people say because it sounds right. On Peleliu, it was not a phrase. It was a condition. The island peeled away whatever a man could spare. It left behind core habits, a stubborn fairness, a willingness to share, a refusal to let cruelty be the last act in a hard hour. Those who had nothing grand to give gave the one thing always in their pocket: decent work done under fire. By the time K divided by 3 divided by 5 pulled off Peleliu, men counted time by ridges and scrapes, not by dates. The map changed colour. The price was written somewhere else. Sledge climbed aboard the outbound ship with hands that had learned a new kind of steadiness and a heart that had learned the cost of it. The air on deck tasted like oil and departure. He looked back once, then turned his face forward, because that's where the next duty would be. When the guns paused, pens came out. War is a poor correspondent, but letters insist on being written anyway. Men wrote hunched over helmets, on crates, on the backs of old orders. They wrote in blocky, careful script, as if clarity could be a gift to the reader. The paper felt thin and brave. A letter home had rules. You told the truth that helped and hid the truth that hurt without purpose. You wrote about weather, about chow, about a joke a kid from Ohio told with the timing of a professional. You asked after neighbors and cousins and the dog who slept on the porch. You thanked people for packages, cookies that survived, as crumbs, socks that felt like kindness itself. You did not describe the worst smells, or the way bright sun turns coral into a mirror, or the fact that night sometimes carried the sound of someone calling out to his mother before he remembered where he was. There's a kind of moral arithmetic in that. Omission can be a lie. It can also be mercy. Sledge understood the difference. He left out what would keep his parents awake without giving them any power to help. He kept in what would let them picture him as he wished to be seen. Steady, useful, courteous, even under strain. On the receiving end, folks in mobile unfolded his words with care, passing pages around the table. Their silence after reading was not emptiness, it was full of prayer. Memory works strangely in a war. It saves small things with jeweled precision and blurs big things into weather. Sledge kept a private museum of moments to take out when he needed them. The taste of a peach, half warm from a can, the way rain smells when it finally finds dust, the exact slant of his mother's handwriting, which somehow made any tent feel larger. These were not escapes. They were anchors thrown into a calmer sea so the mind would not drift too far. He thought of mobile often, not to pine for it, but to keep a promise alive. The promise was simple. There will be an after. A porch light will burn again. A kitchen will rattle with breakfast. A church bell will mark an ordinary hour. The promise did not ask for details. It asked only for patience. Every now and then, a letter from home told of someone who had died, an uncle gone quietly, an old neighbour laid to rest. The news arrived like a gentle wave that still knocked you off balance, because death at home and death in battle are different weights on the same scale. In reply, men wrote carefully. They wrote with the respect that comes when you live under a sky where nothing is guaranteed. Between the lines sat what Eugene could not say, that he had learned to cherish decency the way a man in winter cherishes the smallest patch of sun, that he had seen leadership in its best form and would spend his life trying to match it, that fear is not the opposite of courage, but its oldest companion, and the two walk together wherever men do hard, necessary things. Those truths took time to ripen. For now, they sat on the shelf, waiting. The interlude ended as simply as it began, with orders. You slid letters into the outgoing pouch and tightened your straps. Somewhere ahead lay another island, another set of names that would mean more than you wanted them to. Somewhere ahead lay rain. Okinawa began like a held breath. On the 1st of April, 1945 L-Day, the landings went in across broad beaches, under a sky that seemed, for a few unreal hours, patient. The real fight waited inland. Okinawa was close to the home islands. The stakes were larger, the scale heavier. There were villages and farms, burial tombs turned into strongpoints, ridges and draws stacked like a folded fan. And there were civilians, old men and women, children clutching bundles caught in the tide between two armies. The first thing Sledge noticed was not the enemy. It was the weather. The Pacific had traded white heat for cold rain. Mud rose to claim everything. Foxholes became bathtubs. Rifles took on pounds of grime. Boots sucked at the ground with each step as if the island wanted to keep you. The air smelled of wet earth, wood smoke, and the metal sting of explosives. Rain ran off helmet brims and down collars. There is a sound rain makes on canvas that you do not forget. It is part lullaby, part warning. A mortar team hates mud. Plates sink, tubes tilt, sights smear. You adapt. You learn to build a little floor of broken board and rock. You wipe lenses with the cleanest dirty patch you can find. You become stricter about your talk, short words, exact numbers, because mud makes motions slower, and you cannot afford mistakes that multiply. Okinawa's defense stretched inland toward the Shuri line, a belt of fortified hills where the enemy fought from caves and concrete, slipping away down tunnels when pressure built, returning when pressure shifted. Progress felt like moving a stone up a slope, only to have it roll back a few feet each night. The names of the ridges were less important than their personalities, slopes that looked gentle and were not, draws that gathered artillery like rain gutters gather water. Civilians moved through the same broken ground, carrying what they could carry. The sight forced a kind of double vision. You kept your edge, because to soften it was to risk the lives of the men beside you. You also made room, when you could, for small mercies. A hand steadying an old man across a ditch. A canteen cup offered to a woman whose mouth was cracked from thirst. A child led to a corpsman who spoke softly in a language made of tone and hands. No one pretended the scene was clean. It was human, which is a different standard. The fatigue settled into bones. Shelling came day and night. You learned to read the air by ear, the rising, falling whine that says a round may be searching for you. Sometimes it skipped past and blossomed down the line, and you felt a moment's guilt bloom inside relief. Sometimes it found your vicinity, and the ground punched you in the ribs. You counted without knowing you were counting. Seconds, breaths, the number of times a friend cleared his throat when the whistling started. There were near deaths that settled into the body like weather. A shell came short, and dirt rained into the hole, and 3 men took the same breath at the same time. Another day, a round failed to arm and thudded into mud 3 steps away like a thrown bucket. Laughter came sharp, shaky. Grateful because laughter gives the nervous system a place to put extra electricity. Leadership mattered more with each wet day. The good officers and NCOs kept their voices steady. They handed out tasks as if tasks were life preservers. You, dig. You, check ammo. You, get a hot drink across to the mortars. You, sleep now. I'll wake you in an hour. A soft voice cuts farther through chaos than a shout. A calm face is a tool. A hand on a shoulder is a counsel. Sledge's world remained the diameter of the tube and the sweep of the sight. That was not small. It was the size of duty. He watched for targets. He listened for corrections. He kept count in a corner of his mind that fear could not quite reach. In the muck and cold and constant banging of artillery, the routines of the mortar team made a kind of shelter. Baseplate. Tube. Round. Thunk. Count. Correct. Again. Okinawa forced another kind of counting, to the kind that has to do with how you want to remember yourself. Hatred is a hot coal. It warms cold hands for a minute, then it burns the holder. Compassion is harder work. It asks you to stay human when the world is busy unmaking humanity. Sledge saw both in himself and in others. He learned the limits of slogans. He learned that a man can do his duty without poisoning the well he'll need to drink from later. There were quiet mornings when mist wrapped the ridges, and everything felt held in a careful hand. Birds sang. A cow lowed somewhere as if the island were trying to remember itself. In those minutes, men brewed coffee that tasted like a miracle. Someone produced a dry match and was treated like a magician. Stories surfaced. A corporal claimed he'd once played the trumpet on a dance hall stage and proved it with a few soft notes on a mouthpiece he kept like a charm. A private announced the names of 3 constellations, and everyone looked up, grateful to be told that the same stars were still doing their ancient work. Then the mist thinned, the first rounds came in, and the day resumed its heavy tread. Okinawa lasted. It wore men down the way winter wears down a field, not with drama, but with persistence. The 1st Marine Division fought its way through the southern ridges, losing ground, taking it back, pushing across draws that felt like open mouths. Each day you woke up and did the thing you had learned to do. Each night you lay down in a wet scratch and tried to make room in your chest for the day's wait. Near the end, when the Japanese line finally started to unravel, the exhaustion did not lift. It deepened. Relief can do that. When the pressure comes off, your frame sags and realizes what it's been holding. Men shook without meaning to. Some got sick, as if their bodies had been waiting for permission. Eugene felt the pins of fatigue pressed into every joint. He kept moving, kept counting, kept answering to his name. The word Okinawa would later carry many meanings in many mouths. For Sledge it would always mean rain and mud, civilians and soldiers sharing the same ruined lanes, and the stubborn work of staying decent with your hands full of war. It would mean shells that walked across ridges, and the soft voice of a leader steadying a squad, and the nearly comic relief of a cigarette that stayed lit for 3 whole drags in a crosswind. When the division finally pulled back, the island lay behind them like a long, hard dream, the kind that follows you into waking. The sea air on the outbound deck smelled clean in a way that made men close their eyes. The end came in a way no one on a ridgeline could have pictured. 2 terrible flashes blooming over cities most Marines had only seen on maps, and then an announcement that the killing would stop. In August 1945, word travelled fast and slow at the same time, fast through radios, slow through the human heart. The surrender meant survival for many who might have fallen in an invasion. It also meant the scaffolding inside a lot of men suddenly loosened. Relief is heavy when it first lands. The body that's been bracing for months doesn't know what to do with slack. Sledge felt it like a deep ache. The discipline that kept him upright, relaxed, and with it came a kind of trembling from hunger, from lack of sleep, from the sudden knowledge that he would probably live. In September, the formal signing in Tokyo Bay gave the world a full stop. For the men, it sounded like a soft period at the end of a sentence that had been shouted. Homecomings are stitched out of small ceremonies. A train car's window full of countryside you recognize down to the tilt of the trees. A platform where people stand a little apart at first, scanning faces. A mother whose hands go to her mouth before her feet move. A father who nods once, then again, then pulls you in. A dog that loses its mind with joy and makes the whole block laugh. Neighbours who say your name like a toast. You say it's good to be home and mean it with your whole body. Mobile was still mobile. The porch light still threw its circle. The kitchen still rattled at breakfast. The same church bell marked Sunday. But Eugene's inner map had new roads cut through it. Crowds made him tired. Sudden noises pinched his shoulders. He found himself standing very still for no reason except the stillness felt like shelter. None of this made him strange. It made him human. He did not rush to explain. Words would come later, and when they came, they would be the measured words of a man who respects the listener. For a time he let silence do part of the work. He walked. He fixed what needed fixing. He sat on steps in the evening and watched the light thin. He breathed air that did not carry smoke or fear. He let the dogs wear out their joy. In the months that followed, he chose a path that honoured both what he had seen and what he loved as a boy. Science. Biology gave him a way to pay attention without flinching. He learned the names of things with care. He studied life in creeks and fields. He taught students how to look closely and let the facts speak in their plain voices. There is a dignity in that work. It is the opposite of spectacle. It is patience made useful. Years later, he set down the story in a book. With the Old Breed was published in 1981. He wrote it without show. He did not use gore as glue. He trusted the strength of simple sentences and the reader's imagination. Men who had served read it and nodded. Sons and daughters read it and felt they'd been told the truth. Teachers put it on shelves where younger people could find it without being shoved. What does the life mean, taken whole? Here is one way to say it. A polite Alabama boy joined K Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, 1st Marine Division. He trained at New River, sailed west, staged on Pavuvu, and fought on Peleliu and Okinawa. He carried a mortar tube and rounds, and a quiet promise to do his part. He lost friends. He followed good leaders. He tried to be the kind of man someone could count on. He came home. He learned to be gentle again. He taught. He wrote. He lived in gratitude without pretending the ghosts had left. Service, memory, peace, 3 words that don't always sit easily side by side. Most days they jostle, some days they line up. To honor men like Eugene Sledge is to hold all 3 at once. You don't have to make a sermon out of it. You just keep faith with the work they did and the way they did it. When I think of him last, I picture 2 scenes laid next to each other like pages that face in a book. In one, he bows over a mortar on a coral ridge, the sun white and merciless, his hands steady because steadiness is what his friends need from him. In the other, he leans over a lab table, showing a student the delicate structure of a shell, his voice low, his patience intact. In both scenes, he is the same man, careful, exact, respectful of the task. He was humble, he was thankful, and yes, he was haunted. The haunting doesn't spoil the thanks, it sharpens it. That's the lesson he gives, the one that lasts when the hour is up and the lights go out and the house gets quiet. Carry what you must, set down what you can, and be gentle with the living. That's how you come home whole enough to share the story.